Welcome to the A.Little.Mental podcast, the place where you can find credible information, resources, and community to help you reach wellness a little mental at a time. I'm your host and founder, Morgan Reed, and I'm so glad you're here. Let's get into it. Have you ever wondered if your therapist has to look like you to get you? Now, while the question, does my therapist have to look like me, is an important one, it really references a bigger question around what about your therapist will make you feel safe, comfortable, and give you the best chance of having your experiences validated. So today, we are going to talk about whether your therapist has to look like you, what other parts about your experience should align with your therapist's, and how that all plays a role in the therapist dynamic. So let's get into it. First, let's address the original question. Does my therapist have to look like me? And not to be that person, but it does depend. Let's first back up a bit and get a quick history lesson. The subject of psychology was originally developed by cisgender, able-bodied, heterosexual, Christian, white men. That means a lot of the theories and approaches that were originally developed are based off of the experiences of those who hold those identities and not necessarily based on those who hold other ones. So for example, if you are a person of color, someone who identifies with the LGBTQIA+ community, you have a religious or spiritual practice that isn't aligned with Christianity, or have a disability, or anything that I didn't mention before, you are someone who is considered someone with a historically marginalized identity. What this means is when it comes to systems and experiences, what you deal with in your identities has historically been ignored or devalued. So as you navigate life with a historically marginalized identity, you may encounter a lot of spaces that don't value your experience, or even worse, make it unsafe for you to even fully express them. So coming back to how this can impact therapy, if you are someone who has a historically marginalized identity, finding a therapist that looks like you, it feels like a normal reaction and next step in order to minimize the potential harmful experiences. Again, historically, this has been a great survival tactic, which is why finding someone who identifies with your same experiences may make you feel safe and may also be a better chance at finding competent care. But just because someone checks the same boxes on the census as you do doesn't always mean that they can relate to your experiences. When I was looking for a therapist, I automatically was looking for a cisgender Black woman because that's how I identify, and I automatically assumed that whichever one I found would be a great fit. But once I found one and had a couple sessions with her, I realized we didn't really match up and our therapeutic dynamic wasn't what I expected it to be. It wasn't until I started working with my current therapist that I realized just how important social roles were to aligning with my therapist, to making me feel safe and comfortable and my experiences being validated. So before we move on and talk about other ways you can align or differ from your therapist, let's address the original question. When it comes to looking for a therapist, if looking for someone who looks like you or identifies with you makes you feel safe, go for it. It's a solid strategy, and a lot of times it does end up working out. That being said, just be sure to keep an open mind, because just because they look like you doesn't necessarily mean that they are the best fit for you. So let's get into how a therapist can align with you through other experiences and identities, and how that can play a role in your selection process. Like I mentioned, another way you and your therapist could align is through similar social roles. Social roles are identities that hold certain expectations and norms deemed by society. So that can include things like familial roles, like being a parent or a middle child, professional roles, like being an executive or a teacher, community roles, like being a church member or a friend, or even personalities, like being an extrovert or introvert. Paying attention to your social roles and your potential therapist's social roles can give you a better idea as to how you all may or may not be a great fit for one another. Again, using my experience as an example, it was important for me that my therapist was Black like I am, but it was also just as important, if not more important, that they also experienced going to a PWI, or predominantly white institution, for college. For me, I didn't realize that my therapist being a Christian was important, But when it came to exploring my faith and questioning my faith, it was really helpful that he could understand that culture and those questions about where I was coming from. I also didn't realize that it was helpful for my therapist to identify as an entrepreneur like me. Because we align with this mindset, he's able to switch back and forth between existential reflections and solution-oriented problem solving. This was really important for me as I've progressed through my therapeutic journey because it's helped me learn how to navigate these spaces and balance those sort of reflections. But I also didn't figure all of this out within a few sessions. I just knew that this therapist made me feel safe, they affirmed my experiences, and I felt comfortable in the space. So as I developed and raised my awareness as a human, I also realized how congruent my current therapist is with how I'm developing. This is also why we talk about finding a therapist as being a process. We don't always know what works best for us until we experience things, use process of elimination, and keep our minds open to connections that we may not even expect will end up being what grounds us. I saw 2 to 3 therapists before I found the one I'm with now. So what does that mean for you? As you are looking for a therapist, look for more than just how they present. What values or pieces of you are important? What kind of experiences do you feel like would be helpful to have alignment with your therapist? Again, keep an open mind as you search, but working on raising your own awareness of these things will make the process much easier for you to figure out what exactly it means to find your best fit. So let's talk about how this all impacts your therapeutic dynamic as it develops. Understanding how your identity and social roles intersect with your therapist's identity and social roles happens through disclosure and building rapport. Disclosure is a therapist willingly talking about their experiences as a way to help you feel validated in yours, or even help to open your mind to other possible realities. It is completely up to the therapist's discretion to determine how much of their personal life they wish to disclose. Some therapists don't share at all. Some therapists admittedly share a bit too much. But either way, therapist's discretion around this decision is through the attempt to build rapport with you as their client. Rapport is the key to feeling safe, affirmed, comfortable, and validated by your therapist. It's the ability to align communication styles and understanding so that they can create a space where you can talk about the oftentimes sensitive subjects and topics that you typically do in a therapeutic space. So for example, when I brought up to my therapist that I was struggling with the fact that my grandparents has Alzheimer's, he also brought up and shared that he dealt with family members who had Alzheimer's. He didn't have to bring that up, but he made a decision based on our relationship that it could potentially help me to hear his story so that I wouldn't feel so alone in my experience. And it did end up having a positive impact on me. In contrast, your therapist may not disclose for a variety of reasons. It may not be relevant or even helpful to you. It may also be a sore spot for them, so bringing it up to you may be more damaging for both you and them. Not disclosing could also be about their own safety. Therapists may be more hesitant to share personal details about their life if they're not willing to have it out in the world. Those were some pretty hefty definitions. So just remember that over time, you may get a deeper level of connection and understanding with your therapist through things like building rapport and through their disclosure. Give you and your therapist time to help build this understanding. So let's review a few things we talked about today. Looking for a therapist that looks like you makes sense, especially if you hold a historically marginalized identity. It may be a safe bet that they'll understand your experiences, but it's not a guarantee. Another aspect of your therapist aligning with you is through social roles. Sometimes it may be more impactful that you and your therapist align through your social roles than your demographics, like your gender or racial identities. Ultimately, both of these forms of identity play a role in your therapeutic dynamic, especially when it comes to building rapport and disclosure. The main goal is to make sure that you feel safe, comfortable, and affirmed in your therapeutic space. If you want to learn more about what to expect in therapy or where to find identity-based therapist directories, visit our website, A.Little.Mental.org. You can also follow us on social media on Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram at A.Little.Mental. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to be kind to yourself today.